Greetings, everyone. Tonight, I am going to report about hypothesis, research problem, and statement of the problem. So, with all due respect, let's proceed. So, first, what is a hypothesis? It is a specific, testable prediction. It describes in concrete terms what you expect will happen in a certain circumstance. It is also an assumption, an idea that is proposed for the sake of argument so that it can be tested to see if it might be true. For example, to put it simply, you're watching a movie, but at the same day, you're supposed to have your exam. So, in your head, you're already thinking about possibilities that will happen after you watch the movie. So, that process is called the hypothesis. So, yeah, let's proceed to the next slide. So, these are the guidelines in formulating a hypothesis. First, we have you should identify the variables which will be included in the hypothesis. Then, you need to distinguish between dependent and independent variables. The former correspond to the observed result of experiments, while the latter are parameters you manipulate to observe their impact on dependent variables. Third, after you have distinguished between dependent and independent variables, you should specify the interrelation between them. Namely, you should note which independent variables will influence which dependent variables. The fourth one we have you can now formulate a hypothesis in the form of an if-then statement, which will link one dependent variable with at least one independent variable. For example, of an if-then statement is if independent variable B increases, then dependent variable A will decrease. The fifth one, use only one dependent variable in each hypothesis you formulate. So, number 6. If there is more than one independent variable that influences the dependent variable, you can include them all in the experimental procedure. However, you can change only one independent variable at a time, and you must keep all other independent variables unchanged so that you can be sure that the effect you measure on the dependent variable can be attributed to the independent variable you have manipulated. 7. Note that the proper organization and carrying out of the experimental procedure does not imply the confirmation of your hypothesis. Many scientific experiments have led to the valuable knowledge exactly because they resulted in the rejection of hypotheses. So 8. It could be that the outcome of the experimental procedure includes observations that might have not been addressed by the hypothesis you have formulated. If you want to integrate these anticipated outcomes into the experimental procedure, you should follow the guidelines for the formulation of hypotheses, starting from the beginning. Namely, you should identify variables, distinguish between dependent and independent variables, specify the interrelation between them, formulate a hypothesis in the form of an if-then statement, and then proceed to the new experimentation to test your new hypothesis. So the last one, we have the ninth one. Even if you have formulated a hypothesis that you were very confident would be confirmed, there is always the possibility that your results will not support it. If so, you should then think about formulating new hypotheses. This is exactly the way science proceeds. Ideas that seem very solid are rejected or replaced by better ideas. So now we have how to make a hypothesis. First, you should remember this. First, state the problem that you are trying to solve. So, You should make sure that the hypothesis clearly defines the topic and the focus of the experiment. Second one, try to write the hypothesis as an if-then statement. Follow this template. If a specific action is taken, then a certain outcome is expected. Take note of that. So the third one, we have define the variables. First, independent variables are the ones which are manipulated, controlled, or changed. Independent variables are isolated from other factors of the study. Dependent variables, on the other hand, as name suggests, are dependent on other factors of the study. They are influenced by the change in independent variable. So now we move on to the research problem. So what is a research problem? A research problem refers to some difficulty either of a theoretical or practical character which an individual or organization is experiencing and wants to obtain a solution for the same. There are a number of elements or components which are a problem must have before it becomes a research problem ready to study. So these are the 5 elements of a research problem. First, we have objective or aim of the problem which is to be investigated. This element answers the question why. Why is there a need for investigation, inquiry, or study? Second one, the topic or the theme which needs to be investigated. This element answers the question what. What is to be researched or studied? Third element, we have the time dimension of a decision problem is always the future. The period or time of the study when the data are to be gathered. This answers the question when. When is the research to be performed? Fourth element, we have the area or location in which the study is to be conducted. This element answers the question where we need to conduct the study. The space coordinates gives you the geographic boundaries within which the action is to be taken. Last element, we have population or universe from whom the data needs to be gathered. This element answers the question who or from whom. Who are the respondents? From who are the data to be collected? So these we have here are the guidelines in selecting a problem or topic. These are the criteria for selection of research problem depends on the following characteristics. These characteristics are first, personal inclination. If a researcher has a personal interest in this topic, he would select that problem for his research work. Secondly, resources availability. During the selection, a researcher will see to the resources available. Third, we have relative importance. If the problem is relatively important, then the researcher tends towards the selection of the program. Fourth one, we have researcher knowledge. The wisdom and experience of an investigator is required for well collection of the research data. He can bitterly select a problem. Next, we have practicality. The practical usefulness of the problem is the main motivation for a researcher to attend it. So, the next characteristic, timelines of the problem. Some problems take little time for its solution, while others takes more time. So, it depends on the time in which we have to complete his research work. Next, we have data availability. If the desired data is available to the researcher, then the problem would be selected easily. So the next characteristic, we have the urgency. Urgency is a pinpoint in the way of the selection of a research problem. Urgent problem must be given priority because the immediate solution can benefit the people. Next, feasibility. Feasibility is also an important factor for the selection of the research problem. The researcher qualification, training, and experience should match the problem. Next one, we have area culture. The culture of the area for which a researcher conducts his research is also responsible for the selection of the research problem. So, uh, what we have now is the problem statement of or the statement of the problem. So, what is it? Let's define this. A problem statement is a statement of a current issue or problem that requires timely action to improve the situation. This statement concisely explains the barrier the current problem places between a functional process or a product and the current problematic state of affairs. This statement is completely objective, focusing only on the facts of the problem and leaving out any subjective of opinions. So to put it simply, and to make this easier, it is recommended that you ask who, what, when, where, and why to create the structure for your problem statement. This will also make it easier to create and read and makes the problem at hand more comprehensible and therefore solvable. The problem statement, in addition to defining a pressure issue, is a lead in to a proposal of a timely effective solution. Now, some may ask how to write a problem statement or how do I select one or how do I come up with a problem statement. So, don't worry, we'll discuss that now. A problem statement is a tool used to gain support and approval of the project from management and stakeholders. As such, it must be accurate and clearly written. There are few elements to keep in mind when crafting a problem statement that can have a positive impact on the outcome of the project. First, we have describe how things should work. And you should, next one, explain the problem and state why it matters. Third, explain your problem's financial cost. Fourth one, back up your claims. Fifth one, propose a solution. Sixth one, explain the benefits of your proposed solution. And lastly, conclude by summarizing the problem and solution. So that would be all for my report, and I think I've covered up everything that I was assigned to report, and I hope that you have understood something from my report. Thank you all for listening and have a nice night ahead. Thank you and goodbye.